We just got some stunning video from the battlefield in Ukraine, unlike anything we've seen so far. It captures a rather intense firefight on the outskirts of Kyiv around a train station. We want to show it to you right now, but a warning. It is up close and it's very graphic. It's a depiction of this war.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله. قرب الله. ها؟ هيا سريع هيا. ها خليك سريع.
Wow. CNN, by the way, has verified the authenticity of that video that first appeared on social media. There's more breaking news we're following. Ukrainian refugees are arriving by the millions to neighboring Poland. And according to the United Nations, more than 3.5 million people have fled Ukraine since the start of Russia's unprovoked invasion. CNN's Melissa Bell is joining us now live from the Polish-Ukrainian border. Melissa, at least 2 million Ukrainians have crossed that border into Poland where you are. What are you hearing from some of these refugees?
Well, all of the trauma, Wolf, that they carry with them from the kind of scenes that you've just been watching, the kind of scenes that it's really hard to get access to, but that the refugees crossing this border are fleeing. This is what they have often in their phones. It's certainly what they're carrying with them as they come across. And of course, as you see here, women, their children, a couple of bags. That's what they arrive with. They head to the end of this row here. A bus picks them up and onto a very uncertain future. Not a great deal of coordination for the time being, and we're nearly 1 month into this conflict. What we're seeing is that those scenes that you've just seen in Kyiv and that have been repeated in places like Irpin, Sumy, as you see those moments of heavy fighting in those towns, it is a couple of days later that the people fleeing it arrive, and deeply traumatized they are. What you're talking about is the people arriving here at Medica, where there's more organization than there was to receive them as they first arrive, but a lot less further on. They're arriving with all of that. These are the people who stayed as long as they could and are arriving very reluctantly, leaving their fighting age men behind, and again, carrying all that trauma and heading to the most uncertain of futures from here at Medica Crossing, Wolf.
All right, Melissa Bell on the Polish-Ukrainian border for us. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Breaking news tonight, a chilling message from Vladimir Putin's chief spokesman. Listen to his exclusive interview with CNN's chief international anchor, Christian Amanpour.
Could I quickly ask you, though, I need to ask you this because the world is afraid, and I want to know whether Putin intends the world to be afraid of the nuclear option. Would he use it?
President Putin intends to make the world listen to and understand our concerns. We've been trying to convey our concerns to the world, to Europe, to the United States, for a couple of decades, but no one would listen to us. And before it is too late, it was a decision to launch a special operation, military operation, to get rid of entire Russia that was created next to our borders.
What? To get rid of Russia?
Anti-Russia. Because Ukraine started to be It was formed by the Western countries, anti-Russia.
Okay.
This is the problem.
Okay, look, Ukraine is a country, sovereign. It's recognized by the United Nations. It's been around for a very, very long time. But I just want to know, I want to ask you again, is President Putin, because again, the Finnish president said to me that when he asked Putin directly about this, because President Putin has laid that card on the table, President Putin said that if anybody tries to stop him, very bad things will happen. And I want to know whether you are convinced or confident that your boss will not use that option.
Well, we have a concept of domestic security. And, well, it's public. You can read all the reasons for nuclear arms to be used. So if it is an existential threat for our country, then it can be used in accordance with our concept.
Well,
there are no other reasons that were mentioned in that text.
So you are basically saying only an existential threat to your country. I still don't know whether I've got a full answer from you, and I'm just going to assume that President Putin wants to scare the world and keep the world on tenterhooks.
Be sure to join me tomorrow for a special edition of the Situation Room. We'll be live from Brussels, where we'll be covering the historic NATO summit this week. Thanks for watching. Aaron Burnett Out Front starts right now.
Out front next, breaking news. The U.S. and NATO warning another country is about to join Russia's invasion, even as Putin's top spokesman says the war is going as planned. Plus, Putin's nemesis and top critic sentenced to another 9 years in a maximum security penal prison. Alexei Navalny's close friend is out front. And the breaking news in Washington tonight, the historic confirmation hearing for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. We're going to take you there live. Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, two major breaking stories. Intense fighting this hour in Ukraine. We have new video of a firefight with Russians on the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Bismillah.
This is taking place just about 18 miles from Kyiv. This video just coming in. Obviously, it happened earlier. It is dark there now. But you hear that gunfire and a man firing a shoulder-fired missile launcher. According to the Ukrainian politician who published this video, the fighters are Chechen immigrants who are taking up arms to defend Ukraine. Now, all of this as the war in Ukraine could be about to escalate, get bigger. U.S. and NATO officials tell CNN that Belarus may send soldiers into Ukraine to help Putin. A U.S. official telling CNN, quote, Putin needs support. Anything would help. Well, our other top story this hour is also ongoing, a contentious Senate hearing for Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson. That is underway, and we're going to bring that to you live later this hour. First, though, I want you to hear what the Kremlin spokesman said today, Dmitry Peskov. And he admitted the obvious, saying Putin has not yet achieved his goals in Ukraine. Thank goodness he could at least admit that. There was nothing to cover that up. But Peskov did insist, absurdly, that the war is going to plan.
No one would think from the very beginning about a couple of days. It's a serious operation with serious purposes.
But according to the Pentagon, Putin is growing desperate with the lack of progress on the ground, as Ukraine is making increased headway, not just in holding, but in pushing back Russian troops.
We have seen indications that the Ukrainians are going a bit more on the offense now.
Just today, the Kyiv Regional Police posted this video, which is said to show Ukrainian forces once again in control of the town of Makariv, which is about 40 miles away from Kyiv. CNN has confirmed that is where this video was taken. Ukraine's efforts to actually push back stalled Russian forces from Kyiv has caused that fierce fighting. You know, we just showed you that video that we just got. Also, thick black smoke seen rising over the city amidst those now all too familiar air raid sirens. And the death toll that Russia is facing in its stalled, at best, efforts around Kyiv may be incredibly high. Remember, a Russian newspaper cited the Russian Ministry of Defense, saying 26,000 Russian troops have been killed or injured. Now, Russia denies those numbers, but there may be a way to figure out the toll of Putin's invasion. And that is by looking at the hospitals in north, along the Belarus border. Earlier, I spoke to the opposition leader there, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya.
We get information from medics that this situation has place, that a lot of people, Russian military officers are in Belarusian hospitals, and our medics are like taking care of them. And these cars with soldiers are coming in the night, so nobody could see it, and medics have been sent to hospitals at the borders. It means that they have a lot to do.
Cars with soldiers coming during the night, extra medics being sent to hospitals, and no one allowed to go in those hospitals. That is the sign of what is happening there with Russian troops. And the signs from Belarus itself on joining the invasion are ominous. So as the U.S. says Belarus may send soldiers actually across the border to fight Ukraine, Tsikhanouskaya has a message for those Belarusian soldiers tonight.
Our task now is to persuade, to explain to our soldiers that they don't have to do this for the sake of one person. With this war, they are not defending our country, but they participate in the war of two dictators against our brother Ukrainians.
Fred Pleiken is out front on the ground in Kyiv tonight. And Fred, obviously, you know, what you have been seeing and hearing a lot here in these past hours, more than in some recent days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Aaron. And we have to point out we're under a curfew that was on the entire day. And it's unclear whether or not the Ukrainians used that curfew to move some troops around the Kyiv area to maybe launch some sort of counteroffensive against the Russian forces. But, you know, it was so interesting to see that video of that massive firefight that was taking place there on the ground, because for the better part of the day, we did hear gun battles not far from where we are at all. We did hear a lot of automatic rifle fire, small arms fire, and, you know, whether or not that was the same is really hard to tell, but it was certainly something that was very distinct and certainly something that we have not heard, those gun battles over the past couple of days. Now, on top of that, what you saw here in Kyiv today and heard in Kyiv today was a massive battle that was going on, really probably for 6, 7, maybe 8 hours. There were not only those air raid sirens, but the entire area around the city was covered in thick black smoke. There were plumes of smoke coming up on the horizon. I think we see some of it there. It's actually video that we shot earlier today with some of those impacts that were going on, and all of that is concentrating area, Aaron, around the northern part of the city, the northwestern part, the northeastern part, exactly where those Russian forces are situated. Another thing that also happened, there was a massive bang during midday kind of today, and the Ukrainians later told us that they actually shot down a Russian missile that was flying towards the Ukrainian capital, and that the remnants of that missile then dropped in the river that runs through the capital city, the Dnieper River. But on the whole, you know, it could be the case that the Ukrainians might be launching some sort of counteroffensive. The noises that we're hearing and what we're seeing seems to be coming from that area. Of course, it is very difficult to tell because, you know, no one's surprised. The Ukrainians aren't saying very much about this, but one of the things that they have said is that, of course, they took that very strategic town of Makariv. They showed some video of their forces inside that town now. That's a very key place. That's about 35 miles west of Kyiv, and that essentially cuts off the Russians trying to encircle the city. So the Ukrainians certainly saying they are making headway and also saying they want to launch counteroffensives, Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much, Fred. And I want to go now to retired Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmett. After all of that detail in the reporting, he's also a former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. And Andrei Soldatov is back with me, a Russian investigative journalist, the founder and editor of Agentura.ru, which has been blocked in Russia also senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. So, General Kimmett, you hear Fred reporting that during the day today, 6 to 8 hours of ongoing fighting, massive plumes of smoke, and for the first time, sort of ongoing small arms fire in very clear battles. What do you hear when you hear those details?
Well, it sounds like to me that we're starting to see an initial offensive into Kyiv. It may well be that those small units that we're seeing fighting, which looked a lot like a fight in Afghanistan or Iraq, may be trying to hold back the Russian troops, or, God willing, they're actually attacking the artillery and rocket positions behind the front lines. Unfortunately, I think those plumes of black smoke continue to be the barrage of artillery, rockets, and missiles that the Russians are firing to the city the way they have been doing it in Mariupol for the last few weeks.
But, General, I just want to emphasize what you're saying is it's possible, I know that a lot of the interpretation has been that maybe what we're seeing is because the Russians were stalled and entrenched, that this is a Ukrainian counteroffensive. You're saying, in fact, it may not be. It may be a Russian increase in penetration.
Well, I think it's a couple of things. It could well be that the noise that they were hearing was this opening salvo of trying to soften up the city. I wouldn't call this a counteroffensive, what I'm hearing from these troops. It's more local counterattacks, which are important, but in the long run, they may not be significant in the greater scheme of things.
Well, this is crucial context. So, Andrei, you heard the Belarusian opposition leader talking about these possible mass Russian casualties and, by what they're seeing on the Belarusian side of the border in the hospitals. And a senior U.S. defense official said today that America has seen indications that Russian soldiers are suffering frostbite because they don't even have appropriate cold weather gear. These are Russian soldiers, just to emphasize that. What do you make of all that, Andrei? I mean, that small detail about not having the right hand gear if you're a Russian soldier for cold weather is pretty stunning.
Yes, it is. And it looks like nobody actually was ready for such a long war. And the initial plan was to finish with Ukrainian forces maybe in a day or two. Now, obviously, everything is not going according to the plan, even if, say, Dmitry Peskov is saying something completely different. And, well, they're struggling. We have these rumors and information about more and more casualties. And actually now I'm hearing from my friends and from my colleagues in very distant towns in central Russia that now they hear that some people in families, they know they got kids killed in Ukraine. So it's getting bigger and bigger.
So, Andrei, just to emphasize that, you're hearing that families are now getting word in very different parts of Russia about the death of their children.
Exactly. So,
General Kimmett, on that front, we don't know how significant that will be, right, in Russia. We don't know that, but we do know that perhaps plays into why the U.S. and NATO believe Belarus could now join the war against Russia. Now, whether the military there would go along with that, this is a real question, but that's the understanding here is that might occur. What role would that play? What would Belarus joining do?
Well, that indicates to me that there has been a lot of small unit battles inside of Ukraine. Some of these battalion tactical groups were probably destroyed by the Ukrainian fighters. It's important to note that the Belarusians use the same tactics and have the same equipment as the Russians do. So these could be effectively combat replacements to take over from what the units that have been lost in combat thus far, to give them a little more strength, more air defense, more tanks, because of the losses they've been experiencing on the battlefield.
So, Andrei, the Kremlin refuses to confirm the number of Russian soldiers killed in Ukraine. The spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said, "We don't have the authority to publicize them during the military operation. This is the exclusive prerogative of the Ministry of Defense." Now, the Ministry of Defense, a Russian tabloid, says that there are 26,000 Russian forces killed or injured, which is about 20% of the total who had originally been deployed in that horseshoe around Ukraine. So the newspaper that reported this then, removed all the numbers and said that they had been hacked. So poof, they disappeared into nowhere. What do you think is going on here, Andrei?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yes, Komsomolskaya Pravda now saying they were hacked. But the interesting thing that the best way to counter propaganda of the enemy is to give some real numbers of how many people were killed. And the last time we heard the Russian Ministry of Defense providing any numbers was during the first week of the war. And it was a strange number of 498 people. For more than 2 weeks, we've heard nothing from the Ministry of Defense. What we are hearing are more and more stories about heroic deeds of the Russian military. And usually it is a way for the Russian military to cover that the casualties are quite big.
So, Andrei, I know that a tabloid, though, has traditionally, sometimes you hear the word tabloid and it would imply not accurate. But your perspective on this is crucial because I believe it has been and has often been an important source for these sorts of things.
Absolutely. Komsomolskaya Pravda has been traditionally extremely close to the Russian military. They were the main propaganda outlet of the Russian military during the war in Georgia in 2008 and during the operation in Syria. So they are close to the military. They know what we are talking about.
Yeah, and I think that context is very crucial. Thank you both so very much.